Welcome to the lead. I'm Jake Tapper. This hour, a warning about the combination making the deadliest drugs in the U.S. even deadlier, the animal tranquilizer xylazine that melts people's skin and is now being mixed with fentanyl. Then, watching and waiting, security is beefed up in New York City and Washington, D.C. as the world waits to see if Donald Trump will be indicted today, as he claimed he would. And leading this hour, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese leader Xi Jinping toasting each other today in Moscow, though the rest of the world is not raising a glass. Putin and Xi attended a state dinner, capping off 2 days of talks where they vowed more collaboration in oil production and giving the Chinese government an opportunity to further prop up Russia's sanctioned, suffering economy. Vladimir Putin also said China proposed a plan that could be used for a, quote, peaceful settlement in Ukraine, unquote, but it will only be considered when the West, i.e. the United States and NATO countries, and Kyiv are ready for it. We've got a team of reporters covering the meeting around the world, from Ukraine to the United States. But we're going to start with CNN's Selena Wang, who's in Beijing, where Chinese state media is in a frenzy to push positive propaganda about this China-Russia partnership.
Russia's Vladimir Putin rolling out the red carpet for his, quote, dear friend, Chinese leader Xi Jinping, greeting each other for their second day of meetings in Moscow. Despite skepticism from the West that the visit is more about supporting Russia and furthering Beijing's own self-interests, Putin and Xi signing an economic deal, deepening their partnership, and calling for an end to actions that increase tensions in the prolonged war in Ukraine.
Of course, we did not ignore the situation around Ukraine. We believe that many of the points on the peace plan put forward by China are consistent with Russian approaches and can be taken as the basis of a peaceful settlement when the West and Kyiv are ready for it. But this readiness is not observed on their side.
Since the war began, Russia has become far more dependent on China. China has been propping up Russia's economy amid Western sanctions by purchasing its energy, replacing Western suppliers in electronics, cars, and aircraft, and providing an alternative to the U.S. dollar. Xi is inviting Putin to China this year and told Putin they share similar goals. Putin says Russia has closely studied Beijing's peace proposal for Ukraine, a plan that Washington says would solidify Russia's grip on occupied land.
China would not want to see Putin fail. It would set a terrible example for the Chinese system.
China and Russia have a complicated history, but their shared adversarial relationship with Washington is driving them closer.
This is a marriage of convenience, not of affection.
In Russia, there's some cynicism about Beijing's motives. On a Russian state TV talk show, this military pundit said, China can have only one ally, China itself. China can only have one set of interests, pro-Chinese ones. Chinese foreign policy is utterly devoid of altruism. But Chinese state media is in overdrive, touting the benefits of the Russia-China relationship. And it's all positive comments on China's heavily censored social media. This one says, cooperation and win-win. The next one says, long live China-Russia friendship. Disagreements, if any, are censored. By meeting with Putin, Xi wants to highlight his role as a global statesman that can offer an alternative to the current world order.
But Jake, the real tangible outcome of this meeting is Beijing strengthening ties with Russia in ways that benefits itself. These economic agreements they've signed, it's likely going to increase Russia's reliance on China. Now, China's policy is a bit contradictory, but it really boils down to supporting Putin while publicly declaring neutrality, but also paying no price. That's why the experts I speak to say it's unlikely that China would provide the kind of lethal aid to Russia that would trigger secondary sanctions. Jake.
All right, Selena Wang in Beijing, thanks so much. Meanwhile, Japan's Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, made a surprise trip to Ukraine, where he met with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and visited Busha, the Kyiv suburb synonymous with Russia's atrocities against the Ukrainian people. Kishida's trip marks the first time a Japanese prime minister has visited an area with ongoing fighting since World War II. CNN's Ivan Watson is live for us in the northeastern city of Kharkiv. And Ivan, the timing of this visit seems pretty important.
It does, and it does not seem like it's a coincidence that you had the leader of China visiting Moscow, and then the same day, the Japanese prime minister visiting Russia's enemy, the capital, Ukraine. Kishida laying flowers in Bucha, where there were discoveries of mass graves, of people executed with their hands tied behind their backs after the Russian troops withdrew from that town on the outskirts of Kyiv. Japan signaling its commitment to Ukraine. Last month, it pledged some $5.5 billion in assistance to the Ukrainian government, and has said that it speaks out strongly against Russia's, as it puts it, aggression into Ukraine. In the meantime, the Ukrainians still watching this meeting in Moscow closely. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has come out with statements about the suggestion of a ceasefire made by Putin and Xi today, saying that nobody would be satisfied with that right now, going on to say that that would simply freeze the conflict and allow Russia to regroup and attack again sometime in the future. He says Ukraine has its own peace formula, and that probably involves Russian troops withdrawing from Ukrainian territory, and he wants to share that directly with the Chinese leader. We don't know when these two leaders will talk.
And Ivan, Ukraine and Russia are disputing the details of an attack in the Crimean town of Jankoy. That's where a train carrying Russian caliber cruise missiles was destroyed. What are Ukrainian officials saying about this attack?
Right. I mean, we have seen amateur video of some huge explosion last night. The Ukrainians claim that they hit a shipment of these caliber cruise missiles. We do not have independent confirmation of that. The Russians say, hey, our air defenses shot down some kind of an attack. Somebody was injured. They haven't said anything more about whether or not these missiles were hit. In the meantime, tonight, within the last couple of hours, we've heard about missile strikes on the southern Ukrainian port city of Odessa. The Ukrainians say that they shot down two of these Kh-59 missiles that were launched by Russian warplanes, but two more got through the air defenses and have injured people. We're still waiting to find out more about the extent of that damage.
All right, Ivan Watson in Kharkiv, Ukraine for us. Thank you so much. Now in the United States, U.S. defense officials say Patriot missile defense systems and Abrams tanks will be in Ukraine sooner than originally planned. CNN's Natasha Bertrand is at the Fort Sill Army Base in Oklahoma. That's the only place in the U.S. currently training Ukrainian soldiers. And Natasha, what's behind this accelerated timeline for these powerful Patriots?
Yeah, Jake. So essentially, the Ukrainians have just proven extremely good at learning this Patriot defense system. According to defense officials who we spoke to here all day, the Ukrainians were able to learn the system on an expedited timeline in a way that the U.S. did not necessarily anticipate. So for that reason, because they have been able to take full advantage of this 10-week training course here at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, the U.S. now believes that it is prepared to actually deploy a Patriot system to Ukraine in the coming weeks. Now, that is much sooner than we had anticipated. But again, it is because the Ukrainians, the 65 Ukrainian soldiers who have been training here at Fort Sill for the last 9-10 weeks have proven very capable, because they are among the most experienced soldiers in Ukraine with regard to air defense systems. They are highly educated. Many of them are engineers, and they have proven very capable of grasping the complex system, according to defense officials. And so they will be sending them back to Ukraine very confident that not only will they be able to operate this complicated air defense system to help protect against the Russian missile barrages that have really become a day-to-day occurrence in Ukraine, but also that the Ukrainian soldiers will be able to train other Ukrainians on this very complex system, Jake.
General, good to see you. Clearly, U.S. military officials think Ukrainian troops are ready, based on Natasha's reporting. Looking at the current battlefield, where would the Abrams tanks and Patriot missile systems be served best?
Well, I'm going to talk the Patriots first, Jake, because Natasha's reporting on this issue shows two things. First of all, the Ukrainians were smart enough to pull their very best air defense soldiers out of units to send them back to Fort Sill to be trained. And this is the second part, by a group of U.S. soldiers from the 3rd of the 6th Air Defense Artillery Battalion. Those are the folks that normally train U.S. soldiers. What's made the difference is they have adapted that training because they're training folks who already understand air defense. Now, to get to your question, where is this going to be deployed? You're talking, what you're seeing on the screen right now is the launch from one Patriot launcher. There will be only 2 of those given by the United States as part of that battery. So it's a point defense system. It's got to be placed in a location that is defending a target like a capital city, Kyiv, or a port city like Odessa. So this is not a weapon system that can be moved around on the battlefield based on changing threats. It has to be placed somewhere to defend it. So where it would go, I don't know. I would suspect where the most important targets are, probably some of the cities that have been struck or some of the infrastructure facilities that have been struck by the Russians that Ukraine wants to protect. In terms of the tanks, the second part of your question, what has happened in the Defense Department is they have said, hey, we are not going to send brand new, very best M1A2 tanks. Now, the difference between an M1A2 to an M1A1, which is now what we are going to send, is probably meaningless to most people listening to your show right now. But it's a huge difference. One is a very older tank. It was started to be built in the 1980s. The M1A2 is an upgraded tank with multiple new systems that is much more effective on the battlefield. And it's still going to take a while to get there, just like some of the Bradleys that were announced in January will soon be seeing the battlefield. Where will they be sent? Eventually, probably in the fall, the place where Ukraine has broken through with their offenses. And I believe some of those offensive operations will start probably within the next couple of weeks using the Bradley and Stryker vehicles, some of the other vehicles that have been given from Europe, and that will be in a place that the Ukrainian commanders say, this is where we can make the most difference in terms of attacking Russia.
And General, we only have about a minute left, but I want to get your assessment of the big picture, seemingly a seismic geopolitical shift here with China attempting to flex its diplomatic muscle in Russia. Meanwhile, it appears Japan is responding by going to Ukraine, the prime minister going to Ukraine. The New York Times' David Sanger says the, quote, division of the world is reforming. Do you agree?
I certainly do. You know, Xi is the new senior strategic partner in the Russia-China relationship, wants 2 things out of this visit. He wants to deepen support, trade, and cooperation with Russia. That's very hard to do, and he wants to do that in the shadows. And at the same time, in a more public-facing way, he wants China to be perceived, especially in Europe, as a peace broker. It's going to be hard for him to do both of those things. The very nature, as Ivan reported, that Japan was in Ukraine at the same time Xi was in Russia, says everything. They are working against each other. Tensions are going to remain between China and the rest of the world. They are going to find it hard to do both of the things in their strategic kit bag that they want to accomplish. It's going to be very hard. And the other thing, the China 12-point plan for peace starts off with number 1, respect the sovereignty of all countries and international law. Russia has not done that. It's very difficult to get that word to Mr. Putin.
Yeah. General Mark Herdling, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Coming up, the specific question the judge asked in that more than $1 billion lawsuit against Fox brought by Dominion Voting Systems. Plus, the new warnings of a drug-resistant fungus spreading at an alarming rate throughout hospitals and medical facilities in the U.S.
DA is looking at whether Trump may have falsified business records when reimbursing Cohen for the payment.
This case is not going to be predicated on any one individual, but rather it's going to be predicated on the documents, the evidence, the text messages, the emails.
Cohen has made countless public statements about the investigation.
The DA's team are spectacular. They are well-versed. They are well-informed. And we just will continue to cooperate each and every time that they ask. My goal is to allow Alvin Bragg and his team to do what they need to do.
At the end, the grand jurors have an opportunity just to ask me some questions as well, and I'm looking forward to that.
While he usually says he cannot talk about what happens in the grand jury room, he has been advised to stop talking about the case on TV after drawing the ire of prosecutors for appearing on TV Monday night to rebut Costello's testimony.
If in fact that I waived attorney-client privilege, I'd like to know when, how, where. I don't recall waiving anything, but again, this is I don't know what he's talking about.
Here in Manhattan, prosecutors are facing a deadline The statute of limitations expires for this case in May. So it's clearly now or never for the district attorney. Jake?
All right, Paula Reed in Manhattan, thanks so much. Let's bring in CNN's Shimon Prokopez. Shimon, what kinds of conversations are about security are happening behind the scenes as law enforcement prepares for whatever reaction happens for whatever charges happen?
Right. Yeah, so the reaction certainly from his supporters is something that law enforcement is, of course, concerned about. But the other thing that they're really worried about here, certainly for the Secret Service, is how to get the former president into the courthouse through New York City safely, because there is also a lot of concern for his safety. So that is something that is really going on in discussions behind the scene between the Secret Service, the NYPD, the FBI is involved for any intelligence purposes, and other law enforcement officials from all across this state that are involved in these conversations, because once they get word that, in fact, he has been indicted, there's going to have to be a court appearance by the former president, and it's going to be in Manhattan. Right now, Jake, and this is important, that there's no indication that any of this is supposed to take place this week. All the conversations right now are talking about next week, sometime next week, that if he was to be indicted, that is when we would see the former president appearing in court. And that's when we'll see more security, certainly the Secret Service taking a lead on making sure that the former president entering that courtroom and leaving that courtroom will happen safely.
Yeah, Shimon Prokopez, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Joining us now to discuss, conservative attorney George Conway. George, Trump could be the first former president in American history to be arrested. Do you think this case, what we know of it, involving Stormy Daniels and the falsification of business records, do you think it really rises to the magnitude of such an unprecedented step?
This wouldn't be the first case I would bring against them if I were a director of a movie trying to figure out how to properly organize this. But the fact of the matter is, it's a real case. And the thing to remember about it, and particularly when you hear the gaslighting commentary of former Speaker McCarthy, this case was originally a federal case brought against Michael Cohen for campaign finance violations, failure to report, basically a straw donor, the reimbursement. This was a case brought by the Trump Justice Department. The Southern District of New York brought this case and told the sentencing judge, again, the Trump administration, told the sentencing judge for Michael Cohen that Cohen's crimes were committed at the behest of and at the direction for and for the benefit for Donald Trump. And so these are serious offenses. The thing about Trump is he's committed so many others that it kind of looks less serious than, say, trying to overturn the election and trying to overturn the Constitution and so on and so forth. So that's the only reason why this case has any flaws. It was that it should have been brought as a federal case at noon on January 20th, 2021.
So that's interesting. So you think anyone protesting this case, theoretically, in order to be intellectually consistent, if they weren't protesting the prosecution of Michael Cohen by, I believe it was then U.S. Attorney Michael Berman, is that right? Who Donald Trump had appointed. If they didn't protest
Jeffrey Berman, yeah.
Jeffrey Berman, I'm sorry. Yeah. If they didn't protest that, then they shouldn't be protesting this. It's entirely inconsistent intellectually.
Well, it's consistent to say that this was a political prosecution. I mean, these are real potential campaign finance violations when you're doing something. And let's not, they say, oh, it was because he was afraid of Melania. This happened days before a presidential election. And that was, frankly, Stormy's leverage. That was Stormy and her lawyer had leverage over Trump because of the possibility of a last-minute disclosure. And the reason why the money was paid was to keep her quiet before the election. It was a contribution. It was something that Michael Cohen put up his own money, borrowed from his home equity loan, and then he was reimbursed. And both the making of that illegal contribution and the bookkeeping in the reimbursement were illegal. And the only question, I think, in New York, under New York law is going to be whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony.
You tweeted that Donald Trump's best defense would be to plead insanity. Were you just being cheeky, or do you mean that?
I was being a little bit cheeky. An insanity defense is actually pretty hard under under most jurisdictions' law, you have to show that a person is incapable of determining right from wrong in order and acting on that basis. And Trump, he almost always does the wrong thing, but he knows the difference between right and wrong. And the reason why he knows the difference between right and wrong is he's always denying things when people say he did something wrong, and he's always accusing people of doing something the things that he did. Yeah. So he knows what the difference between right and wrong is, and so an insanity defense really wouldn't work. That said, he is clearly decompensating in some sense. That if you look at the social media tweets that he has put out over the last few days, I mean, this is not a man who he's not a man in full command of his faculties.
I want to get your reaction to one of the many claims we're hearing from Republican congressmen. This one from Kelly Armstrong of North Dakota earlier today.
Everybody's going to have their own opinion on these things. But I can tell you from my experience, if the defendant wasn't Donald Trump, this wouldn't be brought by a DA. That's just the truth.
I keep hearing that, and that yet I remember, I don't know how similar a case it is, but I remember the prosecution of former Senator John Edwards. And that was during the Obama administration, and that was for not exactly the same thing, but it was about fundraisers and donations and a girlfriend, an extramarital girlfriend. Were they similar?
Right. They found a rich woman, a rich old lady, to give money to Edwards' baby mama, in essence, to keep her out of sight and keep her out of, to help the campaign. And I think the problem in that case wasn't a legal problem. It was just that I think by the time of trial, the woman who gave the money was really not in a position to testify because of her physical condition. But that said, it's a valid legal theory. It was a valid federal legal theory. It should have been brought. The fact of the matter is, this case isn't being brought because he's Donald Trump. This case wasn't brought by the U.S. government during Trump's administration, when Trump's administration was investigating it and told federal courts that this was a crime. He was not prosecuted because he was president. So it's actually the exact opposite of what this congressman is saying.
Interesting. George Conway, thanks so much. Enjoy the slopes behind you. I'm jealous. Today, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy called the hush money investigation an opportunity to unite the country. Hear why next. And why the latest banking troubles are nothing like the 2008 financial crisis, according to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. Let's hope she's right. Also, how long the nation's second largest school district may stay shut down as thousands of workers go on strike. What do they want? That's coming up. And we are back with our politics lead. House Republicans are using their newfound power to try to downplay the potential criminal charges against Donald Trump, despite none of us having seen any of the evidence nor know what the potential charges are. CNN's Manu Raja just returned from the House Republican retreat in Orlando, Florida, and joins us now live from Capitol Hill. And Manu, you caught up with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, and you asked him about these possible charges. What did he have to say?
Yeah, he really downplayed these possible charges. I asked him directly, do you have any concerns that former President Trump may have falsified his business records to hide hush money payments to an adult film actress whom he allegedly was having an extramarital affair? He didn't say he was concerned. In fact, he said that it's Donald Trump's personal money. He went on to argue that perhaps this falls outside the statute of limitations. There's some questions about that. And he also contended that Trump did not try to hide these payments, even though there's evidence to the contrary. Now, McCarthy has all along also defended the investigations that his committees have already launched into the New York district attorney, even as they don't know what these charges are. They don't have a sense of what the evidence is, still demanding him to come to Capitol Hill and saying that McCarthy telling me they just have simple questions they want to ask the district attorney. And he argued that Democrats, in his view, are treated differently by prosecutors than Republicans.
I do get concerned when I look out there and I see justice not being equal to others, especially in a history of where we are. And the tough part is with a local DA playing in presidential politics. If that starts right there, don't you think it'll happen across the country? I think it's a place that the country can unite. They want equal justice. They just think it's wrong.
So McCarthy would not weigh in further when I asked him, is he aware of the charges? Have you seen these charges? Of course, he has not yet seen all of the evidence yet. Neither have the top Republicans who are running this investigation into the efforts by Alvin Bragg, the New York prosecutor, who is potentially going to bring charges against the former president, Jim Jordan, who is one of the three key chairmen who has asked Bragg to come testify, asked for records, himself telling me that he doesn't know the full scope of this, simply was relying on press reports. But still, Jordan, and like others, believe that Donald Trump did not break the law despite not having the full scope of evidence here. But that is the way how the Republicans are coming down on this, Jake. McCarthy indicating he has not yet spoken to Donald Trump about this. He hasn't spoken to him in a few weeks. But Elise Stefanik, one of the members of his leadership team, indicated she did speak with him yesterday and also talked to Trump, about the steps House Republicans are taking.
All right, Manu Raja on Capitol Hill. Thanks so much. The hush money case, of course, is not the only legal specter haunting Donald Trump right now. Others include the Justice Department special counsel investigation of both Trump's involvement in January 6th and his alleged mishandling of classified documents. Plus, there's also the Fulton County, Georgia grand jury probe into Trump and his allies' efforts to overturn the 2020 election in that state. CNN's Caitlin Palance is with us now. And Caitlin, have we seen any significant movement in these other cases involving Donald Trump?
Yeah, well, Jake, what we're hearing from our sources is that there is a lot bubbling under the surface in all of these criminal investigations, not just New York. In Georgia, the prosecutors there, they are still at work. They reached out to someone in recent weeks that was a lawyer to Donald Trump, wanting to talk with her voluntarily. They also are looking at potentially complicated multi-defendant cases. We just reported yesterday that there's the possibility they want to look at a racketeering charge related to what happened after the election and Donald Trump in 2020. And they're not going to be pushing that forward just because New York is ready to potentially bring a charge against the former president. So that's Georgia. In the federal cases, I just got off the phone with some sources who were telling me that these are very active investigations. We might not be seeing necessarily charges at this time, but there are lots of people that investigators still want to talk with, both on the January 6th side and on the Mar-a-Lago documents case. And we know that there are many court fights under seal related to, including the former defense lawyer for Donald Trump and the former vice president.
But the criminal investigations are not the only thing that's going on with Donald Trump, right? Aren't there other courtroom activities?
Yes, lawsuits, many, many lawsuits. Specifically, Trump is opposite E. Jean Carroll, the columnist, in a lawsuit, two lawsuits that are going to be going to trial. There's a lot of litigation still around January 6th. Who's liable for that attack of the Capitol? Not just rioters, but there are cases against Trump himself. And then even this morning, I was just in court this morning in federal court in Washington. Rudy Giuliani was appearing before a judge because he is being pushed in a defamation case brought by Georgia election workers. He's being pushed to provide information to them. Has he scoured all of his phones? Has he answered all of the questions under oath that he needs to there? So there's just a lot of different entities that are pushing for answers from Trump and the other people around him. Jake.
All right, Caitlin Palance, thanks so much. Let's discuss all of this with CNN political commentator and former Trump White House communications director Alyssa Farah Griffin and former Congressman Mick Mulvaney, who's also former acting White House chief of staff for Donald Trump. Alyssa, let me start with you. What do you think is going on in Donald Trump's mind right now as the walls appear to be closing in on him in this hush money investigation?
From what I've been hearing, he's obviously very anxious about the potential pending indictment and any subsequent arrests that could come with that. But I'm also hearing from people around him, he feels a bit emboldened by this. I think there's a lot of Republicans like myself who want to see Trump held accountable for egregious things he had a role in, whether it's the Mar-a-Lago documents investigation, January 6th. But there's some concerns that this DA investigation is 7 years old. It's not necessarily, we don't know the details, but necessarily a rock solid case. And I think he sees this as an opportunity to get Republicans to rally around him and say, this is a witch hunt. This is, a liberal judge wanting to undo the 2016 election election results. So I think he sees a lane of opportunity, even seeing people like Nikki Haley, a declared candidate running against him, coming out and defending him. So while he's anxious about what is going to happen in the coming days, he sees this as an opening.
And former Congressman Mulvaney, today Trump came out with a new campaign promise. His presidential campaign for 2024 continues untrammeled. He pledged to reissue an executive order that could make it easier to overhaul the federal government by firing anyone he deems corrupt. He's leaning heavily into this deep state conspiracy theory, the idea that there's a whole bunch of people in the government working against him. I would suspect that you think that what's going on in New York kind of feeds into that in a way.
It does in a roundabout sort of way. I also think they could easily be separate. I'm one of the folks who thinks any president should have the right to hire and fire a lot more people in the executive branch, but that's not really the discussion here today. I think Trump does see this. I think Alyssa's right. I think we're actually in one of those rare circumstances where the extreme left and the extreme right of this country want the same thing, which is for Donald Trump to get arrested. He sees this as a way to sort of build some sympathy because it is easy, much easier to make this case out to be a political witch hunt than it does say something for January 6th of the interference in the 2020 election. So in a strange sort of way, I think that tweet on Tuesday was sort of telling people that he wants to be arrested because he wants this to be one of the battlegrounds as opposed to one of those other charges he's facing.
Yeah, I mean, we heard George Conway say earlier in the show that if he were directing this as a movie, this is not the first case he would bring. Alyssa, Trump's allies did not think that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was supportive enough of Trump's fight against the Manhattan District Attorney. And Trump wrote on Truth Social, quote, Ron DeSanctimonious will probably find out about false accusations and fake stories sometime in the future as he gets older, wiser, and better known. When he's unfairly and illegally attacked by a woman, even classmates that are underage or possibly a man, he's pushed some conspiracy theories about DeSantis that he's alluding to there. That sounded vaguely like a threat to me. What did you think?
Yeah, it sounds like he's got some things in the Oppo book that he wants to drop on DeSantis. But listen, this is what makes battling with Trump so difficult for people who oppose him is he doesn't go low. He goes to the earth's crust. Like he goes to an area that people don't even talk about in polite company. I thought DeSantis honestly actually had a very good line to say something along the lines of, I don't have experience with giving hush money to porn stars to kind of just highlight the absurdity of this moment that we've been in for 7 years with Donald Trump. But anyone who's going to take him on is going to have to be able to deal with the smears that come with going after Donald Trump, with him going the lowest of the low. And we have yet to see who's ready to deal with that.
What did you think, Congressman Mulvaney, about how DeSantis handled this? He went after the prosecutor. Yeah. He said he wasn't going to help the prosecutor, but then he said at least twice the phrase is hush money, the clause is hush money and porn star.
Sure. I think Ron's doing a really nice job of sort of distancing himself from Trump personally while he's still sort of running on the same policies. Ron's pretty good at this. I mean, you don't get to be Florida governor and win by, I think, 20 points last time without knowing something about what you're doing. I'll disagree with Alyssa on one thing. I doubt very seriously that Trump has done opposition research or really has some stuff. I think that's the type of, I guess it's called a truth. I don't Truth Social, that sort of doesn't have any basis. He just he'll make that up in order to try and draw attention away from other stuff. So I think DeSantis is doing a fine job. I also think that the other folks who have backed the president are probably doing a fine job as well. It's a real strange situation where you might be running against somebody, but then having to back him like Nikki Haley did. But look, DeSantis is in a tough position. Imagine the indictment comes down and Trump doesn't want to go to New York. What is Ron DeSantis, as the governor of Florida, going to do with effectively a fugitive in his state? So it could get really interesting really quick.
Well, I think he has said, I think he said he's not going to help the prosecutor. I think that was what he was suggesting there, Ron DeSantis. So I guess he's not going to be sending the Florida National Guard to perp walk the president. Alyssa, Trump's allies have been using the new House majority to demand that Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg testifies, looking to stop his investigation. What do you think of that? I mean, is that also politicizing